So hi everyone, I'm delighted to be here. This is such a beautiful venue. It makes me even more excited of being here today. So before we begin, I have a little bit of a confession. So I was on holiday last week. I literally flew in from the beach to be at EmberCamp and hang out with you guys today. So the talk is themed very vacation-y. So I've used all the photos. I've used photos that all the photos are my own except two. You'll see why. And I've used them throughout the talk, so it's themed that way, very vacation vibe kind of thing. So by the end of this talk, I think two things are going to happen. One, you're going to hate me and you're going to wish you were on a beach instead of being in this dark room. And two, I'm hoping that we'll get to talk a little more about tools and why tools are important and how we can make them not boring and fun so that engineers can use them. So my name is Ingrid, and you can find me on Twitter and GitHub and various other internet places. I rant a lot about a lot of things other than taking loads of pictures, like culture in tech and imposter syndrome and how we can simplify things. So if you're interested in any of that, come talk to me or tweet at me and let's talk more about it. I'm based in Dublin. I work for Intercom. And the good news is that we're actually opening an office in London. So my colleagues that are around, they have Intercom t-shirts on. Come talk to us afterwards if you want to learn more about what we do. But in terms of tech stack, let's talk about the tech, right? That's what we're here for. So we're a customer communication platform, and we're a 4 years old Ember app. So Ember front end, Rails back end, and then there's different other components that use different technologies in the background. And something that I like to do every time I talk about Intercom or talk about our front end Ember application is look at some stats to give you a little bit of a context into the scale of things and give you more insight into why we think that the examples that we mentioned and the problems that we've run into, you might run into. So in the last, we look at the stats for the last year for our main front-end application, we had 52 authors. I have to look because I'm super bad at remembering numbers. So we had 52 authors that committed almost 350 times to master, almost 440 times across all branches. And that resulted in almost 1,000 file changes with something like 14K additions and almost 7.5K deletions. So on top of that, we always say that shipping is at the heartbeat of Intercom. So we ship to production on average about 100 times a day across the stack. And what's even more crazy about these stats is that the entire company, we all had a week off last week. So it wasn't just me going and hanging out on the beach for a week. We all got a week off as you've done great work, now go and rest and sit on the sun like a tomato for a while. So it's pretty cool, and it kind of speaks about the engineering culture that we have. So confession part two, I've started working for Intercom about a year ago, and my background is somewhat different as infrastructure and backend. So I'm quite new to Ember. I haven't done Ember before. And this is my second talk at an Ember event. So it kind of speaks to how wonderful the Ember community is out there, and the guys are doing a fantastic job to being welcoming to newbies like me, and that's awesome, and thank you for that. And the second part of it, as a result of that, is that I have a lot of questions, and I ask a lot of questions, and kind of go, how does this even? And I like to poke around a lot, which is exactly what, the result of that is this talk today, right? So when I started, I worked on a project called Educate that got released in December, which is a knowledge-based platform. So the first thing that I had to do is implement this site settings preview that would allow our customers to customize their document site. So as you can see from the screenshot, we allow you to input a favicon, a logo, and a header image. So me being the newbie that I was like, okay, well, I have to get the image, and then I have to return that image and display it somewhere so that people would know what their website looks like. Sure. So I'll just wrap an image source inside the HTML safe, return it, and ta-da, it works. I was super excited, right? Especially being super new to JavaScript. I was like, yay, I turned this around in 2 days. I'm awesome. I'm a JavaScript genius. Well, turns out, nope, no, I'm not. So when I've committed my changes and pushed to a branch and created a pull request, and then we have continuous integrations tests that rely on a Git hook to trigger every time you create a pull request. So CI pretty much went, you think you're awesome, but nope. So what ended up happening is that I was getting this error that now there's like n plus 3 HTML safe counts, and well, you cannot merge because you've broken something. So do you ever do that thing where like you stare at your screen and you kind of go like, what does that even mean? Do you do that? I don't do that either. I don't know what you're talking about. So I was staring at it, and I was like, well, okay, so what is HTML safe? What does this even mean? And like, let's break it down. So me looking into HTML safe and asking what the hell does that even mean actually turned into a talk that I gave at EmberCamp at the beginning of the year. And it's around security for front-end applications and why that is important, but even more important, how engineers can help with security. So if you're interested in that, I'm not going to rant about HTML safe anymore, but if you're interested in that, go watch it. I've been told it's good. But an important part of that and an important part of like the learning process is actually understanding what happens and understanding like the feedback that you're getting. So if you look at the setup that we had at the time, we had something called CI tests that were pretty much a bash script, which was horrible. And then it was doing all the things from like JavaScript to CSS checks to like making sure that we don't do something that we shouldn't, pretty much. The problem with it is that you would get feedback only after you've created a PR, because that's when your CI test would run. Or if you would explicitly know that that script exists, which when you're a newbie that just arrived, discovery comes with time, especially on, we're the second largest Ember app in the world. I think LinkedIn's first. So that's, it takes a little bit of time. And it kind of made me think, well, shit, I want to go faster, right? Like, we're talking about shipping things. I want to ship things. I want to go faster. How do we do that? Well, first of all, what do I need to be able to do that? And there's always this idea of, like, when you're talking about checks, there's this idea of tools versus tests. So I was trying to figure out where does this even fit, right? What's a tool? What's a test? So what's a test? Well, to me, like a very simple definition of a test is that it answers the question, does my code do something? Does it work? Does it do everything that it should? Does it display correctly in a browser? Does it return the correct answer? And the answer to that question is, well, maybe. And we're not sure, right? And we can't be sure until we have something that validates that. And that's what a test is, and like a very simplified, silly definition. The idea of a tool is kind of like an engineer's like dream thing, because a really good tool allows you to really have wings, right? And do your job significantly better, faster, get better results, get more insights, learn a lot, be better. And to me, a tool answers a different question, which is like, how do I even help me do all the things? So it's more like helping me test, helping me performance test, or helping me deploy, or whatnot. In a way, if you think of compilers like a very simplified definition of a compiler or a parser, it's a tool that tells you that your syntax is valid, or the code that you've written is correct from like a language point of view. But what these two have in common is that they will both notify me if something happens. It will notify me if my code doesn't work the way it should. It would notify me if the deployment failed, or like if the code doesn't compile or whatnot. This is what they have in common. And this is something that is kind of like the root of what I thought was the root of addressing this problem, right? But I wasn't quite sure like exactly why we need it, right? Like we all can agree that tests are good, we need feedback, but what's the actual problem that we want to solve? And if I were to take those CI tests from CI and put them somewhere else, what is it that I'm trying to actually achieve with that? Other than I want to move faster and like that's cool and whatnot. So we actually say that quite a bit in Intercom, and I think it's a great way to, like what I've learned is that it's a great way to allow you to be deliberate. So rather than building something that is really cool, we're going to build this awesome tool, or like use this awesome test framework, it allows you to answer the question of like, what is it that I actually need? What is it that would actually help me? And if I invest X amount of time, what is it that I'm going to get out of it? And I think that's something that's very important, and it allows you to be significantly more efficient. Well, when you look at vulnerabilities in the code, there's two, or like bad behavior in the code, I guess, right? There's two things. You can either make an effort and fix all, all the things. If you have the resources, which when you're in a startup that grows as fast as we are, or like in any kind of startup for that matter, resources mean time and engineering, and that's usually something that's lacking, or not enough of. And then, or you can pretty much draw a line and stop it from happening. And that's exactly what that CI test was trying to do. It was trying to like introduce a kind of like a line in the sand and say, well, this is the count that I'm allowing. You cannot go further than that because that would be bad. It will just be like a never-ending feat to try to get HTML safe out of the code. But at the same time, what does a good tool or test mean? Well, for me, that means, first of all, visibility in the code base. So it allows me to understand it better. And also, we have, so like in our case, for example, we were multiple teams that work on a shared code base. And when someone that's maybe not familiar with the code or working on something that they never worked before, you can end up in the situation of having like version A and version B, and you kind of go like, well, what, like, how do I even, like, which one do I choose? How do I know? And that can come from experience. So like when you've been doing this for a while, you're getting better at it. But when you're a newbie, it's a little bit, you know, you're not sure. So visibility is important. And then I also want to have easy navigation in the code. And I want to make sure that I understand it better and there's no surprises. And ideally, I want to have real-time information about the state of the code, the state of my branch, what's happening, what is it that I have to do to get from point A to point B. And I also want my tests, ideally, if it's possible, or a tool, to not just be like the snowflake thing that exists only on one project. I want it to be across multiple projects. So, for example, in our case, our main app, our main intercom app, which is written in Ember, is like our biggest Ember project. But we also have like smaller versions for like the marketing site and the developer home and whatnot. So those, because they're client-facing, those would benefit from some sort of HTML check as well. And I don't want to just like copy that bash script and put it in another project. That's quite horrible. I don't want to do that. I don't like code duplication or file duplication. But you also, when you're growing very fast, you have to care about onboarding. You always have to care about onboarding, but it's going to become even more of a problem when you have to like onboard multiple people every week. And you kind of want to give, you know, power to the newbies. You want them to, while they receive mentoring, you also want them to be able to like learn on their own and poke on their own. And I'm the kind of person that documentation is great. It is awesome. But I prefer whatever it is that I do, especially if I learn a new programming language or technology or whatnot, tool, whatever. What I do is poke at it, like how does this work? Rather than like reading pages and pages long of documentation. That doesn't work. It didn't work for security for me either. That's why like I felt like I understood it more when I had like a real example to work against. So if you're like me, documentation is not the answer. Sitting there and reading about HTML safe is not the answer. But having something that would alert you and like allow you to learn as you go is a better approach because you're learning from experience, so chances are you're going to remember more about it. So going back to the idea of stopping bad behavior, unless we have like millions to invest in a lot of resources, a good practice is to set a limit and then alert when that limit is exceeded, and that's what the CI tests were doing. And initially, the way they were implemented was quite silly. We did like a grep for HTML safe. It was bash, right? And then we'd count the number of errors, and then if the number of errors exceeds the limit, it would alert, and hence me going like, what is this, and my build failing in CI. But something that was lacking clearly from my like my requirements for such a tool was it being real time. So what we did is look at the Ember CLI for the rescue and at the post-build hook. And what the post-build hook allows you to do is pretty much display anything after your build finishes. You can display a message, you can do whatever you want, you can say hello world or good job, you've built something. But in our case, you can also throw an error. So if the count exceeds, if the current count exceeds the limit that's predefined in the code, you can just throw an error and that will break the build. And the engineer will, it will inform the engineer that something has gone wrong. So this turned into something that we called internally interlint. We prefix everything with inter because it's cool and we like our name. And it was a very simple Ember add-on that on file change, it was running the check and then displaying the error if it needed to. But the problem with that, again, the newer problem with that, is that it was using a regular expression. It's grep regular expression. And I've ranted about this many, many times, that regular expressions are like black magic, and you should avoid using them. And the reason why they're kind of like black magic is they are, you take a maintenance, I don't know, tax out of using regular expressions, and you have to make sure that like you understand what you're doing, and it cuts down readability. So there's always kind of like a trade-off with it. And also, wouldn't it be cool to have something that would allow me to run checks on like multiple methods, so HTML safe, reads, window open, and whatnot, without having to like write a regular expression for like that particular method. And the third problem is like Bash and JavaScript. Like, how do I even? Like, Bash is ugly as it is, and JavaScript is sometimes confusing. So like, let's not combine the two. So then we had an idea to look at linters. And linters, there's things that they're doing really, really well. And the things that they're doing well is visibility. So they allow you to, ESLint, for example, would parse, would allow you to actually set custom rules, first of all, which is quite cool. So you can write your own checks for whatever it is that you want to check, verify in your code. And it's relying on something called an abstract syntax tree, or an AST, because it's simple to pronounce. An AST is something that's used across like different projects. So Babylon uses it in Babel, like the parser, the JavaScript parser uses it. And ESLint relies on it as well. So you can, rather than like relying on grep, you can use ESLint to understand what the, your file structure looks like and what are the methods in that file. So if you want to write something like, if you want to write your own custom method, there's going to be very little code in this talk, by the way, but this is like a part that has a little bit of code. So everything in JavaScript, be it a method or property, means it's called in a certain way as far as AST is concerned. So when you have a method in AST land is called a call expression. And then this call expression has different properties. So for the current node, if it's actually a method, we're going to check for that property. And if the property has the name HTML safe, then I want to like report the fact that I've detected the error and potentially display a message that would somewhat allow the engineer to understand what the hell is going on. So if you want to know more about AST, it's kind of like, it's a little bit of like a weird, the first time you look at it, but there's a really great tool online. It's called, it's at astexplorer.net, where you can pretty much just parse a block of JavaScript, and it would, you can like click through it, and it will allow you to see what that's called in AST terms. So it's a good way to debug it. So in terms of like the architecture behind it, our add-on was super simple. So every time the code compiles or parses, the postable hook would trigger an ESLint check, rule check, that would analyze the code and generate a report. And then if the count is higher than the limit, it would break the belt. So it would just throw an error. Super simple. You don't even have to worry about creating the report. ESLint does that for you. And the parser is very simple. Like the report is in a JSON format, which is great. It's parsable, so you don't have to like even do a lot of heavy lifting to be able to get this information. And that worked pretty well. But turns out, looking at performance, I'm team infrastructure. I get to care about that stuff a lot. That linters are somewhat slow. And the reason why they're notoriously slow is because they deal with files, and disk is expensive. Disk is expensive in terms of time. Disk is slow. It's always going to be slow. So the fact that it's writing to disk, the fact that it has to like open a file and do something to it, it's quite expensive. And also, we were doing something that was interesting. We had enabled about like 50 plus rules in ESLint, because enable everything. Why not? My code is going to look amazing. And what ended up happening, surprise, surprise, is that we were exactly the opposite of like ship fast and real-time feedback. It wasn't bad. It was in the matter of like a couple of seconds, but a couple of seconds, you know, a couple of seconds for every file, it's not great, right? So we had to go back to the idea of like, what's the problem that I'm actually trying to solve here? Well, if you look at linters or static analyzers or like try to think why in the world would you even like analyze your code. Well, you'd analyze it to potentially detect some style inconsistencies because we want things to be pretty and look at them and read them and understand them without too much effort, right? And then in this case, we want to stop bad code from hitting production, or code that we no longer want to be part of our app. And style is something that's usually easy enough to fix, doesn't require a lot of effort. Sometimes it just requires you to configure linters and save them, and then they're going to automatically do things for you. But bad code is harder. And if you look at HTML, say, for example, that would involve like a significant like logic change and refactoring to actually refactoring the way I deal with images. So that's harder to fix. So it made me think that maybe we should disable style-related rules at the dev build time, and we actually did. And encourage the engineers to use something else for it, which is the editors. So both Atom and Sublime, which are probably the most popular ones, allow you to set up, they integrate with ESLint. So every time like you write code, it's going to display alerts to say the style is not correct and this function is not, this method is not named properly and whatnot. So we disabled that, and then we enabled only the add-on in dev to check the bad code. And we went pretty much from like 2 seconds down to like a 0.7 seconds or something like that, which was pretty cool. So it's kind of like a neat trick. If that's something that you do, it's kind of a neat trick to like fix that. And then, well, can we use this add-on for more? Like we now have prettier checks for HTML safe. Can we use it for more? And the answer is, well, yes, we can. What if we have a rule that would allow us to check for like would allow us to verify multiple methods in our code? And it would look quite similar, except instead of taking like one argument, like one method argument, it would take like a list of methods and then like loop through. And the advantage of that is that you don't have to like load things twice. It would be like significantly more performant. And then now that we have that, we're like, well, wouldn't it be cool to like send this into the open source world? Maybe other people have a similar problem with it, right? But turns out that when we consider that naming things is really hard. By the giggles in the room, I'm guessing it's quite a popular problem. So we were initially thinking of calling this EmberCLI High Tide, because line in the sand, get it? And that was like, yeah, like we could see that. We weren't sure. It was like, yeah, it would probably work, but like I don't know. And I'm Romanian, and I've been told this exists in the States as well, but Tide is a detergent in Romania, which I've very outspokenly stated that this actually makes me think of a detergent. So my colleague Gavin, that's like there in the room, he was like, well, make your code Alpine Fresh. That's actually perfect. And then our other colleague, Lorcan, we are the 3 troublemakers behind this add-on. He pretty much sent us the definition of the detergent and of a detergent. And upon reading it, we were like, shit, that actually fits, right? So I hereby give you EmberCLI detergent. So the idea behind this, and if you're asking, is that not what a linter can do as well? Like, why the hell would I need to like use your add-on now? Well, the idea is that you can use the rule itself with ESLint, right? You can enable it in ESLint RC and do all the things. But what made us actually create this add-on and wanted to like put it out there in the world is that we want to set a limit that allows engineers to be deliberate about incrementally making the code better. So we want to draw a line and actually make a commitment to like lower that line as we go. So lower the count of like whatever it is that you don't want in your code anymore. Reads, observers, HTML safe, whatever it is. And the second thing is that we want something that allows me to set a custom message so that engineers can learn and understand why something shouldn't be used. I don't just want to say, I don't want you to use this, but I want people to understand why, because that's how you grow engineers. And that's how everyone is like happier to like show up to work the next day. So the configuration, we've tried to keep the configuration for it very, very simple. So you get this, it's object that allows you to specify a list of methods. So in this case, it's just HTML safe, an allowed count, and a message. This all goes into a detergent rc.js that's in your root project. I love seeing detergent, it's so fun. That goes into like your root folder, and then step 2 would be to just enable it in package.json. I think we're at version 0.07 right now, so it's still quite in beta. It's still like, it's something early for us. And then you're done. And then when it runs, there's 2 things that can potentially happen. One is that you have a count that's higher than the allowed limits, which is the first example. So it's going to say your method and then the message and then current count versus max allowed. And then if your count is lower, it's going to say, hey, good job, but there's this limit that exists there, and go update it, which is something that initially I didn't have in my CI build. Like, where do I even go? What is that? Now you do. And it's public in our GitHub repository, so it's under intercom, Ember CLI detergent. I hope it's public. If not, it will be at the end of this talk. I'll make the repo public. Sorry, I'm lacking caffeine this morning. But I strongly encourage you to like create issues and like tweet at us and let us know how you use it, because that's how we're going to make it better. The future is bright. We want to add even more message options, and we want to have support for more than just functions, maybe properties, and support for parent modules as well. So this is coming very, very, very soon. So this was like the cupcake version, ship to learn part. But I kind of want to leave you with like 2 things in this mix of like tools are awesome, ranting about linters, and like check all the things. Sarah May had a brilliant closing keynote at EmberCamp, this year, where she pretty much said that a code base is something that we all have to live in a code base, especially when it's a shared code base, and we all have to like get along and learn and get something out of it, rather than we're just submitting code and shipping things. And that's kind of the idea behind a great tool as well, right? So what I would love to see, and what this is kind of like the start for, especially for me, it's my first add-on, yay, is that I would love to see tools being built with the idea of learning and mentoring. So not just like throwing something out there because it's cool or it solves a problem, but also alongside solving a problem, use it to like learn more, explore more, be curious, poke at things, and also enable beginners to have wings and go do their own thing. And the second thing is that all code becomes tech debt, and we have to agree on that. Everything eventually becomes obsolete. So building a tool that would allow you to have that like code with that idea that your code is going to eventually go away and you have to iterate quickly is something that's quite great to have. So with that in mind, thank you very much. It was awesome to be here with you today. I hope you enjoyed my images.